The year is 1198. Deep beneath the Lateran Palace in Rome, a monk whose name history never recorded descends a narrow staircase carved into limestone. The air is thick, not with incense, but with mold, the kind of mold that grows on animal skin left in darkness for centuries. His torch throws orange light across shelves stacked floor to ceiling with scrolls, codices, and leather-bound manuscripts so old the bindings crumble when touched. His hands are shaking. Not from cold, though the subterranean chamber sits at a permanent 11 degrees. He is shaking because he has been ordered to move certain documents to a new vault. Documents no pope wants the world to read. Documents that describe in painstaking Latin events the church spent 500 years trying to bury. He wraps them in oilcloth. He seals them with wax. And then they vanish. For 800 more years. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This is the origin story of what the world now calls the Vatican Secret Archives. And the word secret does not mean what you think it means. For decades, popular culture has painted the Vatican Archives as some kind of underground fortress filled with alien skulls, time machines, and suppressed gospels written by Jesus himself. Hollywood gave us conspiracies. Best-selling novels gave us shadowy cardinals guarding ancient prophecies. Internet forums gave us theories about hidden technologies and interdimensional portals buried under St. Peter's Basilica. Every single one of those images is wrong. The truth is far less cinematic and far more disturbing. Because what the Vatican actually hid for centuries was not supernatural. It was human. Painfully, brutally, unforgivably human. The real name of the archives is the Archivum Secretum Vaticanum, and in medieval Latin, secretum did not mean secret. It meant private, personal, belonging to the Pope alone. That distinction matters because it reveals the true purpose of the collection. These were not documents hidden because they contained dangerous mystical knowledge. They were hidden because they contained dangerous political knowledge. Letters between popes and kings. Financial records showing how much gold the church extracted from entire nations. Trial transcripts from inquisitions where men and women were tortured until they confessed to crimes they never committed. Papal bulls authorizing the enslavement of non-Christian peoples. Correspondences that reveal, in the Pope's own handwriting, that certain doctrines were crafted not out of theological conviction, but out of raw political necessity. The archives stretch across more than 53 miles of shelving. 53 miles. If you laid every document end to end, they would reach from Rome to the coast of Naples. And for most of their existence, no scholar, no historian, no government on earth was allowed to see them. Pope Leo III partially opened the archives in 1881. Partially. Researchers were granted access to selected materials under strict supervision, with entire sections remaining sealed. Even today, documents dated after 1939, covering the pontificate of Pius X and the Church's relationship with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, were only opened in 2020 after years of international pressure. And still, there are sections no living researcher has entered. So what do we actually know is in there? Let us start where the darkness is deepest. Let us start with the Dark Ages themselves. The period between roughly 500 and 1000 AD is called the Dark Ages, not because nothing happened, but because almost no one outside the church could write. Literacy in Western Europe collapsed after the fall of Rome. The Germanic tribes that swept across the continent, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Lombards, were warriors, not scribes. The Roman infrastructure of schools, libraries, and public administration disintegrated within 2 generations. Roads crumbled, aqueducts broke. Cities that once held 200,000 people shrank to villages of 3,000. And in that vacuum, one institution, and only one, retained the ability to read, write, and record: the Catholic Church. This gave the Church an almost unimaginable power. They became the sole narrators of European history for 5 centuries. Every chronicle, every legal document, every birth record, every land deed, every treaty. All of it passed through the hands of monks and bishops. If the Church did not write it down, it did not exist. And if the Church wanted something erased, it was erased. The Vatican Archives contain thousands of documents from this period that were never meant to be seen by anyone outside the papal inner circle. Among them are letters that reveal how deeply the Church manipulated the political landscape of early medieval Europe. One of the most explosive is a collection known as the Donation of Constantine, a document that claimed Emperor Constantine himself had granted Pope Sylvester I the supreme authority over all of Western Europe in the 4th century. For nearly 700 years, the papacy used this document to justify its political dominance over kings and emperors. Popes waved it in the faces of monarchs who dared to challenge them. Wars were fought over it. Entire dynasties rose and fell because of it. It was a forgery. In the 15th century, the Italian scholar Lorenzo Valla performed a linguistic analysis that proved the donation was written in 8th century Latin, not 4th century Latin. The vocabulary, the grammar, the syntax, none of it matched Constantine's era. It was almost certainly fabricated in the papal chancery around 750 AD, likely to bolster Pope Stephen II's alliance with the Frankish king Pepin the Short. The Church knew. The archives held the original, and for 7 centuries they said nothing. But the donation of Constantine is only the surface. Deeper in the archives lie records that illuminate the true texture of life during the Dark Ages, and they paint a picture that is almost unbearable. Consider what it meant to be an ordinary person in Europe between 600 and 900 AD. You were almost certainly a serf, which meant you were legally bound to the land you worked. You could not leave. You could not marry without your lord's permission. You could not sell your own grain without paying a tax to the local bishop and another tax to the local lord. Church records from this period, preserved in the Vatican Archives, show the exact tithing schedules imposed on peasant communities. 1/10 of everything, 1/10 of your wheat, 1/10 of your eggs, 1/10 of your milk. If your cow died, you still owed the tithe on the milk it would have produced. If your crops failed, you still owed the tithe on the harvest you did not have. Failure to pay meant excommunication. And excommunication in the 7th century did not just mean spiritual exile. It meant social death. No one could trade with you. No one could shelter you. You became a ghost while still breathing. The physical reality of peasant life was staggering. You woke before dawn. If it was winter in Northern Europe, you woke in darkness at temperatures that regularly dropped below -15 degrees Celsius. In a one-room hut shared with your family and your livestock. The animals were not pets. They were heating systems. A single cow radiates enough body heat to raise the temperature of a small enclosure by several degrees. You slept on straw that was changed perhaps twice a year. Fleas were a constant. Lice were universal. The Church's own penitential manuals, handbooks for priests hearing confessions, contain entries about the sin of picking lice during Mass, which tells you exactly how pervasive the problem was. Your diet consisted almost entirely of dark bread made from rye or barley, thin porridge, and whatever vegetables you could coax from soil you did not own. Meat was a luxury reserved for feast days, perhaps 5 or 6 times a year. Church records show that monasteries, by contrast, consumed staggering quantities of food. The monks of St. Gall in Switzerland, according to their own inventory records from the 9th century, brewed over 1,000 liters of beer per day. Per day. While the peasants outside their walls subsisted on gruel, the men who told them God demanded their suffering drank themselves to comfort every night. If this reality shocks you, if you have never heard the Dark Ages described from the ground up instead of from the throne down, take a moment to hit that like button. This is history that textbooks skip, and it deserves to be heard. Women in the Dark Ages occupied a position that can only be described as relentless. Church doctrine, drawn heavily from Augustine and later reinforced by Gregory the Great, held that women were the inheritors of Eve's sin and therefore fundamentally more susceptible to moral corruption. The Vatican Archives contain papal letters that explicitly instruct bishops to monitor women's behavior more closely than men's, to restrict their movement, and to ensure they remained subordinate to their husbands in all matters, spiritual and material. A woman could not testify in a church court. A woman could not own property in many jurisdictions without a male guardian. A woman who was raped could be forced to marry her attacker under certain legal frameworks because her purity had been destroyed and no other man would have her. These were not fringe interpretations. They were policy, written, sealed, and filed in the archives of the most powerful institution on earth. Childbirth was the single greatest killer of women during this period. Without antiseptics, without surgical knowledge, without even basic understanding of hygiene, a woman entering labor was entering a situation with roughly a 1 in 5 chance of death. Church records from rural parishes, many of which have been preserved in the Vatican's collection, show that it was common for a man to bury 2 or 3 wives during his lifetime, and for a significant percentage of children to die before their 5th birthday. The average life expectancy hovered around 35 years, though this number is deceptive. If you survived childhood, you might live to 50 or 60. But surviving childhood was the hard part, and the Church's response to this ocean of suffering was not medicine or reform. It was theology. Suffer now, they said, and be rewarded in heaven. Pain is purification. Poverty is virtue. Do not question. Do not resist. Obey. The archives also reveal how the Church dealt with those who did not obey. Long before the formal establishment of the Inquisition in the 13th century, the Dark Ages saw waves of persecution against heretics, pagans, and anyone whose beliefs deviated from approved doctrine. The Synod of Whitby in 664, for example, was not merely a theological debate about how to calculate the date of Easter. It was a power struggle between Celtic Christianity and Roman Christianity. And the Vatican archives contain correspondence showing that Rome pressured the Northumbrian king Oswiu to side with the Roman faction. When he did, Celtic monks who refused to conform were expelled from their monasteries. Their manuscripts were confiscated. Their traditions were suppressed. An entire branch of Christianity, one that had preserved learning through the darkest years of the post-Roman collapse, was systematically dismantled. And then there were the trials. The archives hold transcripts of ecclesiastical courts from across Europe during this period. Men and women accused of witchcraft, heresy, or consorting with demons were subjected to procedures that would today be classified as torture. The ordeal by water, the ordeal by fire, the ordeal by hot iron. In the ordeal by hot iron, the accused was forced to carry a piece of red-hot metal for a specified distance. Their hand was then bandaged and inspected 3 days later. If the burn was healing cleanly, God had declared them innocent. If it was infected, as nearly all untreated burns would be in a world without antibiotics, they were guilty. The Church called this divine justice. But the Vatican archives do not only contain records of cruelty. They also contain something perhaps more troubling: evidence of awareness. Letters between popes and their advisors show that certain members of the hierarchy understood, with full clarity, that the system was unjust. Pope Gregory I, writing in the late 6th century, expressed concern about bishops who accumulated wealth while their congregations starved. His letters, preserved in the archives, show a man who genuinely wrestled with the gap between Christian ideals and institutional reality. But his reforms were modest, temporary, and ultimately overwhelmed by the machinery of power he himself sat atop. There is a document in the archives, referenced by researchers but rarely discussed in popular media, that dates to the early 9th century, during the reign of Charlemagne. It is a report from a papal legate sent to assess the state of the Church in the Frankish Empire. The legate describes, in cold bureaucratic Latin, a landscape of spiritual ruin, priests who cannot read, bishops who bought their positions with gold, monasteries that function as private estates for noble families, parish churches that have not held a proper mass in years because the local priest does not know the liturgy. The legate does not moralize. He simply reports. And the report was filed in the archives and never acted upon. This is what the Vatican hid. Not aliens, not time travel, not suppressed gospels. They hid the receipts, the paper trail of an institution that controlled the spiritual lives of hundreds of millions of people, while simultaneously operating as a political machine, a financial empire, and a surveillance apparatus centuries before any government invented the concept. The archives also contain records that illuminate how the Dark Ages ended, or rather, how they were transformed. The 10th and 11th centuries saw a slow but unmistakable shift. The Cluniac reforms brought new discipline to monastic life. The founding of the first universities, Bologna in 1088, Paris shortly after, began to break the Church's monopoly on knowledge. And the Crusades, for all their horror, reopened contact between Western Europe and the Byzantine and Islamic worlds, bringing back Greek philosophy, Arabic mathematics, and medical knowledge that had been lost to the West for 500 years. The Vatican archives contain the correspondence that launched the First Crusade. Pope Urban II's letters to the bishops of France, urging them to preach the cross. These letters are remarkable because they reveal the mixture of genuine religious fervor and calculated political strategy that drove the entire enterprise. Urban needed to unite the warring nobles of Europe under a common cause. He needed to redirect their violence outward, and he needed to reassert papal authority over the Eastern Church. The crusade accomplished all three objectives at the cost of rivers of blood. If you are still here, if this history is gripping you the way it gripped me when I first discovered it, do me one favor: subscribe. Not for the algorithm, not for the numbers, but because this kind of history, the uncomfortable kind, the kind that forces us to look at institutions and systems with open eyes, needs an audience. And you are that audience. There is one more thing the archives reveal about the Dark Ages that deserves attention, and it is perhaps the most unsettling of all. Throughout this period, the Church maintained detailed records of what it called miracula, miracle claims. Saints' cults generated enormous revenue for the churches that housed their relics, and the Vatican required formal documentation before recognizing a miracle. These files contain testimonies from peasants, monks, and nobles, describing healings, visions, and supernatural events. Read without context, they are moving. The desperate prayers of sick children's parents, the tearful gratitude of a farmer whose failing eyesight was supposedly restored. But read in context, they reveal something darker. Many of the miracles occurred at churches that were facing financial difficulties. A new miracle meant new pilgrims. New pilgrims meant new donations. The archives contain letters from bishops explicitly requesting papal recognition of local miracles. And the language is not spiritual, it is commercial. One bishop writes that without a recognized miracle, his cathedral cannot sustain its obligations. Another notes that a rival diocese has recently received recognition and is drawing away our faithful. The miracle economy was, in many cases, a marketing strategy. And the Vatican kept the books. Stand in the Vatican today. Look up at the Sistine Chapel. Look at the gold leaf, the marble, the frescoes painted by the greatest artists who ever lived. Every inch of that beauty was paid for by someone. By the serf who gave 1/10 of his harvest. By the widow who dropped her last coin in the collection plate because she was told it would save her husband's soul from purgatory. By the peasant who worked 14-hour days in fields he would never own, under a sky he was told belonged to God, for an institution that told him his suffering was holy, while it counted his pennies in a Roman vault. The Dark Ages were not dark because people were ignorant. They were dark because knowledge was hoarded, deliberately, systematically, by an institution that understood with perfect clarity that an illiterate population is a controllable population. The Vatican Archives are the proof, not because they contain some single explosive revelation, but because they contain the mundane, relentless, meticulous record-keeping of power. Thousands of letters, tens of thousands of financial records, hundreds of thousands of legal documents, all saying the same thing in 100 different ways. We knew. We knew the system was broken. We knew people were suffering. We knew our doctrines were being used to justify exploitation. And we filed it all away in the dark, where no one would ever read it. Today you carry a device in your pocket that gives you access to more information than every medieval library on earth combined. You can read the works of Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine, texts that were once locked behind monastery walls, accessible only to those who had sworn obedience to the institution that guarded them. You have the one thing the medieval peasant never had: the ability to verify what you are told. And yet, how often do we use it? How often do we simply accept the narratives handed to us by powerful institutions, governments, corporations, media empires, without asking to see the receipts? The Dark Ages did not end because someone discovered electricity or invented the printing press. They ended because people began to demand access to knowledge that had been kept from them. That demand is not a historical event. It is a permanent responsibility. The Vatican Archives are still there. 53 miles of shelving. Centuries of silence. And every year, a few more pages are turned. A few more seals are broken. A few more uncomfortable truths crawl into the light. The question is not what the Vatican is hiding. The question is what we are willing to look at once it is revealed. The stones of Rome are quiet tonight, but the paper remembers everything.